So welcome to our study of Treasury of Precious Qualities by Omniscient Jigme Lingpa. And as always, kindly generate the awareness of what the purpose of what we're doing here is, which is essentially getting to the bottom of confusion, identifying what drives confusion, what constitutes the elimination of confusion, and how we can effectively engage in the path that eliminates confusion. So in this sense, we're not really engaging in anything that's Tibetan or even something that we can limit down to referring to it as some sort of ism. It's just simply referring to something that we all recognize in terms of our own experience. And even if though this is communicated across cultures from a different time, we would want to be in a place where we actually are translating this into our own experience. The only thing that's required here is really an open mind that's willing to hear this the way it's intended. So we can't come with our own sort of baggage of projections based on our own particular modernity, but rather we need to have a clear appreciation of the intentions that from which this comes, which of course reflects a culture and a vision that extends far beyond what we're habituated to. But that said, I'm sure everybody here can perfectly gets that. And so with that, you could say that preparation with bodhicitta. Then we're looking at presently the second aspect of the four wheels, which is how to attend to someone that actually shows the way, how we actually effectively embark on the path on the basis of a living tradition of someone that guides us. So we've been looking last time at how we need to identify someone that guides us. This time we're going to look at the one who is being guided, namely the qualifications of the student, particularly identifying what we don't want to do, and on the basis of that being more clear on what really needs to be generated and cultivated. So we begin with invoking the Omniscient Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind thermas, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, and Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So then looking at the root text itself, we're going to be looking at verse 27. Like sick men on their doctors, and like travelers on their guides, like merchants on their helmsmen, and the fearful on their braves, like seamen on their pilots, all those who dread their foes, defilements, birth and death, should take support of teachers such as these. I think we actually covered that last time, sorry. Yeah, we covered that. We're on to 28. The characteristics of bad disciples. So, if those who take their teachings are improper vessels, no profit do they get from such a nectar. They're satisfied with trifles, and their faith is changeful like the seasons, shallow and contrived. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, the compassion and blessings of a perfect spiritual masters are impartial, untainted by favoritism and dislike. It is, however, a fact that just as the quintessential milk of a white lioness cannot be obtained in a vessel made of base metal, a disciple who listens to the master's teachings, but who lacks the qualities of faith, intelligence, diligence, and determination to be free of samsara, will not be benefited by the elixir of the master's instructions. These are general points. So one thing that we'd want to look at here is where Kangyur Rinpoche says the masters are impartial, untainted by favoritism and dislike. And it's so often that you hear, sadly actually, among students, oh yeah, the Lama really likes, or the teacher really likes this person. That's probably from seeing that somebody makes the teacher laugh. And that, of course, is sometimes excellent. But at the same time, it doesn't really mean that the teacher is partial to such a person. And maybe a teacher is wrathful with another student. I was just reading about a great Sakya master called Gaten Ngawang Lekpa, who on 5 occasions tried to attend teachings with Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. On each occasion, Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo singled this very determined young monk, singled him out and said, "Get that guy out of here." And on 5 occasions, then Gaten Ngawang Lekpa, he tried to attend Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo's teachings. Each time, Khyentse Wangpo kicked him out. And we might think, well, Khyentse Wangpo didn't like him. Doubtful of that. Gaten Ngawang Lekpa became one of the greatest masters to uphold the teachings, particularly of the Hevajra and the Lamdre teaching. And undoubtedly, this kind of treatment was something that purified his obscurations, his obstructions, and so on. So it's not as if Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo didn't like Gaten Ngawang Lekpa. And similarly, like also a teacher is not partial just because there might be some students that are close, sitting around the teacher, hanging out with the teacher, and so on. So to think that the teacher would have some sort of partiality towards some, favoritism, dislike, and all of that, would really be to perfectly miss the idea of what a teacher is. In that case, then there's not really much benefit in associating with the teacher if we have that kind of perception. But there is then something which we need to take into account. This is, as practitioners and recipients of the teaching, then we have this image of a white lioness. And that's where in traditional Tibetan medicine, some of the medicine is made with milking a snow lion. So thus have I heard. And the milk of the snow lioness simply cannot be contained in an ordinary vessel made of base metal, just so you know. So that's where the disciple who's receiving profound instructions needs to be someone who is not of a base nature and lacking the qualities that are enumerated here: faith, intelligence, diligence, determination, and so forth. So these are the general points. And then Kangyur Rinpoche more specifically then says, some people who lack confidence in the profound Dharma may have a superficial devotion because they're pleased by circumstantial trifles, gifts, smiles, and other marks of favor. Such shallow artificial devotion serves no purpose. It is as changing as the weather, there in the morning, gone by the afternoon. Abandon it, for it is fragile and easily altered. So this again, if the teacher might sort of, send down a present to a student, or, hand over to some students a particular gift or one kind or another, then getting all sort of excited about that and depressed if the teacher is rough and so forth. So that's why it's important to go beyond these sort of shallow, changeable moods that might just simply be reactions to particular superficial gestures. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, abandon this approach. It's fragile, easily altered. 29. At first, like wild yaks, some refuse to enter on the Dharma path, and then they hate to study or reflect. Their only interest is this present life. At last, they go with evil friends, and like the wild men in the forest, take to evil ways. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, even with the help of many different methods, some people are very difficult to coax into the Dharma. At first, they are like wild yaks, difficult to herd into the cattle pen. Then they are fractious and unruly when they are instructed and made to study. And anyone who is diligent in the Dharma, they detest. The present life is their only interest. In the end, they neglect their vows and samayas and take up with unsuitable friends. They go from bad to worse and stray from the teacher and their Dharma friends, eventually becoming like the wild men of the forest and the outlands who shun the company of humankind. So on certain areas in southern Tibet, borders onto areas where the people there are not particularly interested in the Dharma, and mainly actually live as what we would call hunter-gatherers at this point. So that's where the entire project of Dharma is entirely wasted from these people's point of view. And they're generally seen as being persons that perpetuate a particularly destructive lifestyle in terms of hunting and so forth. So that's where some people, they initially have no interest in the Dharma. They might get brought to the Dharma, and then once they come across the discipline of actually educating themselves in the Dharma, they're completely uninterested, and they're really more just interested in the sort of gratification of the ordinary. So then 30, it reads, some, even when the master is present, wish to be away, and yet wherever they may go, they're caught by sinful ways. When told to stay in solitude, their Dharma practice falls apart. They are like the tips of kusha waving in the wind. But kusha is a particular grass. It has a very, very thin stalk, and it has a little bit of a bushy tip. So it very easily waves when the wind or breezes blow. So that's where then some persons might come in the presence of a great master, and they just don't want to be there. And they naturally gravitate towards, and here we're going to have to be a little bit sort of cool with regards to the choice of language, sinful ways. I know a lot of us have issues with the term sin, but again, when we're studying Buddhism, we have to use words, otherwise it's just going to end up becoming incredibly bland. And so yes, we can say negative actions, but in a way sinful does carry a particular strength. But of course, yes, there's some baggage associated with it. But if we could get over that, then in the context of Buddhism, we're really just talking about not something that's defined by some exterior agent as absolute, but more essentially understanding the causes and conditions that lead to suffering. That's what we mean with sin and sinful ways. Anyway, that's where some persons just naturally gravitate towards what in fact is destructive. So when they're told to stay in solitude, their Dharma practice falls apart. So they're unable really to sustain their own independent practice and are really just driven by circumstances. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, then there are people who, even when they are in the teacher's presence, are constantly preoccupied with all manner of plans. They think that better than staying with the Lama, they ought to be away, practicing in solitude. They rush away, but no matter where they go, they take up with bad friends. Their practice and actions degenerate, and they'd get caught in evil ways. On the other hand, if they're actually told to go into solitary retreat and apply themselves steadily to spiritual practice, they may well stay there, but they disregard their teacher's instructions, and their practice falls apart. They give themselves up to idleness and distractions, failing to do even one session a day. They are no different from the tips of kusha grass, bending here and there as the wind blows. So actually, sorry, this was a little bit different from just persons who dislike the Lama, but it's more those that while they're around the Lama, then they're so keen to go off and retreat. And once they are in retreat, actually are not really able to sustain the practice. 31. Some with evil natures, with deceiving, twisted tongues, approach their teacher like a musk deer. Once they take his musk, the holy Dharma, gleeful with the prize, they throw away their pledges. So that's again where Dharma is turned into a commodity. And this actually is happening nowadays in the modern context where there actually nowadays there's even persons who become Dharma teachers as a career, where they actually, they start off saying, I'd like to, when I grow up, I want to become a meditation teacher and so on. And that's where Dharma is then treated as a commodity that can generate a lot of income. And of course, this is also the case with just persons who haven't actually had exposure to Dharma traditions and more sort of just learn it from books and so on and regard it as something that's, again, just a field of knowledge like any other. And again, intend to make money on this. So that happens. And that's where we can look at the teachers of the past who had no interest whatsoever in making money. Sometimes it was necessary and of course there was always the situation with people making donations, but these donations would always go to noble causes and never to sort of, you could say, a lavish lifestyle of the teacher. It would always go to be building monasteries, temples, stupas, benefiting others, helping the poor, and so forth. We look at the life of someone like Shapka, who whenever he was traveling, he would have this trail of beggars behind him, simply because when he received offerings, he gave these away. Similarly, also the late Jakob Rinpoche, who had when people would make offerings to him, he'd put the offerings in a particular box, and once a year he would go down to Calcutta, and then he would set fish free, and what very often was for an enormous amount of money. So that's where the opposite of that is approaching the teaching as this commodity. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, then there is a bad sort of person, skilled in trickery and unsatisfied by mere wealth and reputation. People like this covet the prestige of receiving empowerments, transmissions, and instructions, as if these were items of merchandise, and they approach the spiritual master with deceitful intentions, laying a trap as though for a musk deer, without any thought of the master's kindness. Their one intention is to get the mask, in other words, the sacred Dharma, and when they have it, the samayas and vows are tossed away, just like hunters who, having killed the deer, are excited by the prospect of selling the musk. These disciples are thrilled at their new standing, proud of having received such a teaching. People like this, who throw away the samaya with their teachers, will be wretched, and this in future lives. So that's where some persons might have attended a lot of teachings, done retreat, and all of a sudden they have to call themselves a lama this or lama that, and begin to sort of essentially make a living, and without much consideration actually of how incredibly brilliant their own teachers were, and without any kind of humble recognition of the incredible, you could say, divide there is between the sublime nature of their teacher and their own incapacity. And that's where that kind of blindness actually leads to simply just the Dharma being completely wasted. The real nature of the Dharma is just simply, there's just this insensitivity. So 32, those whose plans exceed their own capacity receive essential teachings, but then lay them on one side. They ferret through a stack of texts and tire themselves. Before discovering something new, they lose what they had known before. So that's again just continually looking for new stuff, and actually being like the dog with the bone in its mouth that in the reflection in the river sees a dog also with the bone in his mouth and starts barking at it and then losing the bone. Anyway, so that kind of approach. He says, then there are disciples whose plans far exceed their capacity. They receive all the essential and direct instructions on the key points peculiar to the phases of generation and perfection, but they do not practice them, thinking that in order to do so, they need an explanation of the entire Dharma. And so for forgetting about their practice, they search here and there for different texts, making copies of them, and busying themselves with notes and annotations, and tiring themselves out. Even before they catch sight of something new, they will already have forgotten the little they had previously understood. So that's again example of just simply not really hearing what is being taught. 33. Some have faith that joins them to the perfect teachings. Some appear to have it, but are interested in worldly goals. And some are neither of these two. Their Dharma is just a lie. The nature of these three is important to discern. So again, three kinds. Those that had faith that enabled them to actually connect with the teaching. Those that connect with the value of the teaching, but they're just really thinking about how it's going to help them in a worldly sense. And then there are those who have neither of the two, and for whom Dharma is absolutely nothing that touches them. So we have these three. Kangyur Rinpoche says, there are in general many individual types of disciple, but they can all be classified in the following three categories, which is important to understand. To begin with, there are those who have genuine faith, who sincerely receive, reflect, and meditate upon the perfect teachings. They have great interest and devotion and are determined to free themselves from samsara. Then there are those who have the appearance of practitioners, but they are lacking in genuine determination and settle only for success and honor in their present life. Finally, there are those who belong neither to the first nor second category. They are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. They're foolish and false in their Dharma practice, embracing it simply because other people do so. Without prior consideration, they engage in it rashly and without faith or sincere intention. Their practice of the Dharma is like the meditation of a monkey or the recitations of a parrot. They end up like stray dogs wandering the streets. They're neither practitioners of the Dharma nor straightforward worldly people. Now, this is a little bit, of course, some of this while this is, of course, universal themes, specifically, you could say the last category is again the phenomenon that you don't have so much in the modern world, but those that then take up Dharma as a career and actually have no interest in it. They're completely lukewarm, as it's said here, and really just the Dharma is just a show. And that's where then it's ordinary persons who really have nothing in terms of some genuine Dharma. So they might sit and look as if they're meditating, as if a monkeying meditation posture, recitations of a parrot, and so forth. And they have nothing genuine to offer. And so they're worse than ordinary people because they're pretending to be practitioners, and they have absolutely no Dharma from within. Let's see what the footnote says. So this is from Yönten Gyatso, and he says, people belonging to the first category are disciples who are able to benefit themselves and others. The teacher should instruct them unreservedly. So that's the first category. They are actually able to do something for both themselves and others. As for those belonging to the other category, the teacher should use every possible skillful means to draw them onto the authentic path. And that's where they might actually be able to understand the Dharma. They just happen to be fixated on something that is inconsequential and superficial. But there's some potential there, and the teacher should try to really draw them in. And even if the attempt fails, the teacher must continue to care for them lovingly with means of prayers and aspiration, so that they might become disciples in the future by virtue of their connection. So that, of course, actually applies to all three categories, which is, from the point of view of the disciple, that's in the two last categories very unfortunate, particularly the last kind. But from the point of view of the teacher's compassion is impartial. And that's why we very often have examples of teachers who will care for the worst and put a lot of time and so forth. And the other students don't really understand why the teacher is spending so much time on this particular student. And sometimes we might say, oh, that's because this student might be someone that was rebirth of someone in their previous lives and so on. But we should probably look back at what we looked at before, that there really is this impartial attitude from the part of the teacher. And certainly as an injunction to those who are teachers, then it's about telling them to continually embrace even the challenge students with love and prayers of aspiration. So we've covered a little bit then the bad disciples, and now the characteristic of the good disciples. Having seen what not to do, we're now looking at what to actually do. 34. But those well armed, whose minds are very firm, who serve their teachers at the cost of life and limb, who implement the teacher's word without concern for self, such beings will find freedom simply through devotion. So this is what we'd want to strive towards: serving the teacher, implementing the teaching. This is what really brings about freedom, and particularly the operative word here is devotion. Devotion being not something unhealthy or based on blind faith, but on deeply valuing the qualities of the teacher, and also seeing how the qualities of the teacher resonates within something within. And that's where there then is, on one hand, a clear appreciation of the teacher, and also at the same time, a humility that recognizes what needs to be done in terms of one's own limitations. So on the basis of that, then there is this appreciation of the teacher that goes beyond just an ordinary dedication to someone else, but really a vision of what the path may bring, and the recognition of what is required from one's own side. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, by contrast, good disciples don the armor of devotion like Naga Bodhi, who realize the truth. Okay, I'm not so sure about that. Let's see here. I.e., he realized no self of persons and phenomena. Okay. They have, you know what that means, right? That's you could say, that's realization of reality without the projections that we normally are stuck with. Projections with regards to ourself and projections with regards to the perceived phenomenal world. That's where the phenomenal world abides perfectly as the nature of the Dharmakaya. The phenomenal world is untainted by our confusion. Unfortunately, as long as we don't connect with the reality of what is, then we're stuck in suffering. And that's where the teaching on insight into the nature of how phenomena exist independently of our confused projections are then the teachings on what we call the twofold selflessness, the introduction to how the phenomenal world doesn't exist the way that we in our confusion project onto it, and our subjective experience and sense of person also doesn't exist the way that we confused project or construct ourselves. So that freedom from projection, freedom from, you could say, delusion, is what we mean with realizing the truth. So that's where someone like this person, Naga Bodhi, then realized the truth on the basis of devotion. They have steadfast minds, and like Pagi Yeshe, serves the teacher and the doctrine without a care for life and limb. Okay, Pagi Yeshe was one of the 25 disciples of Padmasambhava, if I'm not wrong, but there doesn't actually say much here about what actually his story is. Like Jetsun Milarepa, who we probably know about, they do whatever their teachers tell them, without regard for their own comfort. Disciples like this are liberated merely by their devotion. Let's see if there's some questions here. Okay. I remember being advised to sleep with kusha grass under the pillow. Why might that be? Because we say the kusha grass is a very auspicious substance. So sometimes when we receive empowerments and we're told to check our dream so that we have clear dreams, then we place kusha grass along our body and across also up at the pillow, really to create the auspicious circumstances for an auspicious dream. So we regard this as an auspicious substance because the Buddha sat on a heap of kusha grass when he attained enlightenment. Instead of sin, would non-meritorious be a better fit? Oh yeah, well, I think the various translators have thought long and hard about these things that yes, occasionally I'm sure non-meritorious would also be used. Yeah. Hi, thank you for this. Could you explain what is meant by evil deeds and evil behavior? I think I did that. That has nothing to do with something that is, you could say, defined in absolute terms, but rather simply just understanding that some actions are going to lead us to suffer. And that's where these actions are by nature sad, confused actions. We unnecessarily destroy our own happiness. So that's why we refer to these as evil deeds. So it's not as if we're saying this as we sometimes do in some systems where it's a prescription, because it says so in the scripture, because so-and-so said so, it's bad. Of course, in the Buddhist teachings, which don't have the baggage that many of us do, then we will sometimes say, well, it was forbidden by the Buddha, and that's why. That's sort of the short answer. But of course, why the Buddha would prescribe it is a bit like when the doctor prescribes to not smoke. It's not that it's bad, the doctor has decreed, it's because the doctor said so, it's because we know that smoking is not good for us. Or anything else where the doctor might say, while you're taking a particular medicine, avoid this or that. And this is simply just because it's harmful for us. But then we might say, oh yeah, the doctor told me not to. But that doesn't necessarily imply something, you say that's like a dogma. It's just pure common sense in terms of what brings about suffering. Can you please explain about samaya? What is it? Samaya simply just is a term that comes up a lot in Vajrayana culture, and it really just refers to the commitments, the vows, and the discipline of Vajrayana practice. I just attended a Vedic wedding ceremony, and kusha grass is used throughout as a ritual substance. There you go. So maybe also beyond just the Buddhist context, then kusha is regarded as something very auspicious. Very interesting. Okay. Okay. Thank you for this. Somebody's explaining what the story about Nagabodha. It said that Nagabodha attained realization by consuming a piece of snot of his lama. How would this work? Well, just that openness. Sometimes students of great gurus would actually, consume all sorts of things. That's really just, you could say, the auspicious conditions are there, the incredible openness and the devotion and so forth, then something just might shift on the basis of that. So what we can say is that there are inconceivable auspicious connections at work. How can one be liberated by devotion? Very good question. Because normally we're stuck within a very insecure small space, which is essentially what we in common parlance call ego. And where we very often are unimaginatively stuck in very uncreative patterns that are driven by this narrow scope of the ego, there might be on the basis of merit, on the basis of just some incredible karmic condition, that we actually see someone that we perceive as having sublime qualities. And the moment that we perceive these qualities, and this is of course where we'd want to, as we looked at previously, to discern that this person is not just a charlatan, but a genuine teacher. But in that case, seeing such a sublime person, we look to this person and we see qualities that resonate within ourselves with qualities that are unowned, unpossessed by confusion. And that's where the devotion to such a person enables us to connect with qualities that are free and which we possess innately. So devotion is essentially what takes us beyond ego. We could say compassion does it too, but with devotion, we connect directly with someone that possesses enlightened qualities. So it's not just that we are operating on the ordinary mind. We could say genuinely, in general, compassion, while it's a quality of the of Buddha nature, it's a quality of enlightenment. Then initially, when we cultivate compassion, it's very much within a dualistic context. Whereas devotion to an authentic, enlightened person is connecting with the qualities and the inconceivable qualities that we can't put words to. And that's where often, if we look at, for example, when we try to explain what's so great about the Dalai Lama or explain what's so great about our teacher, we just end up realizing we're just sitting and saying blah, blah, blah. It's just, and it doesn't make sense to anybody. If you try to talk to a skeptic person about the qualities of your teacher, saying so-and-so is so compassionate, other people would say, and the teacher has this quality, that quality, but every time that you put labels onto it, this is actually not doing justice to the nature of the teacher that far goes beyond what can be, you could say, limited into language. So that's why the devotion is something that connects us to an already spontaneously present quality of enlightenment. And that's where we say, particularly for the Vajrayana, that is based on engaging qualities of enlightenment that are spontaneously present. These can only really be intuited on the basis of devotion. So we would say on the basis of purification, accumulation, and devotion to a awakened person, then there could be the realization of co-emergent wisdom. Okay, 35. Disciples should have faith and wisdom. They should be possessed of learning and of great compassion. They must respect their vows and their samaya, be disciplined in body, speech, and mind. They should be generous, broad-minded, with pure perceptions and a sense of shame. So all of this. These also correspond to some of the qualities that we refer to as the 7 riches of sublime beings, which are then faith, discipline, generosity, learning, shame, decorum, and wisdom. Anyway, these are some of the qualities that these are the qualities a student should possess. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, disciples should have faith, the source of all spiritual qualities, and a clear, lucid intelligence, unafflicted by doubt. Okay, let's just, for a moment, we need to stop on that one with faith, because that's really something for the modern person to be told to have faith, or to be told to believe, or to be told to trust, is tantamount to really subscribing to what is profoundly destructive. It's synonymous with basically being told, just close your eyes and be ignorant. For the modern person, faith is the antithesis to insight. And so that's where, when we approach the Buddhist teaching, we really need to understand what we mean with faith in the Buddhist teaching. In the Buddhist teaching, faith is, like we were saying before, that which enables us to be sensitive to what goes beyond the ordinary data of the rational mind. And so, of course, for the modern person, knowledge beyond the rational mind is almost a non-existent, at least in theory, because, of course, the modern person, just like anyone else, relies on the inconceivable qualities of faith or love or all these kind of, you could say, beyond rational qualities. But it's not really properly understood. And certainly with the history of faith being the root of exploitation and so forth, faith in the modern language is particularly for persons who have studied history and critical thinking, is very problematic. And that's where sometimes when we have the encounter between traditional teachers who are not really aware of how these are buzzwords, then it becomes a little bit problematic. But of course, what we do mean with faith is that on the basis of having examined the teaching critically and understood how the teachings brilliantly connect with our particular disposition, how it addresses the causes of our suffering, how it leads us out of suffering, and moreover, how the teacher possesses not just the theoretical knowledge, but a complete realization of this path. This leads to a place of awe and complete openness. And when we have that openness, then we can really receive. It's a bit like when somebody is actually really awed, then they listen. Whereas when people sometimes come up with new perspectives, then right away they have to say, yeah, but this, or yeah, but that, and how about this, how about that? And there's, you could say the vessel is not really open, not really, you could say, perfect to receive. And of course, yes, it's very important to be critical and to sort of, you could say, clear away all doubts. And that's why we talk about prajna, first hearing the teaching and then reflecting on them. But then once we've really seen the validity of the teaching, then we shut up. Then we really listen and we're really open to receive and hear and look at all the qualities in the teacher, the way the teacher walks, talks, engages with the world, and on the basis of faith and devotion also is sensitive to what's behind these qualities, that sort of awake quality of just being completely on the dot, being completely selfless, being completely attuned to reality. And that's where, when that kind of openness is present, then we can talk about surrender, then we can talk about faith. But of course, the modern person needs to first understand what precedes that kind of openness. But on the basis of that, then, or you could say this then touches this abiding intelligence within. And that's where then a flourishing takes place on the basis of interaction with the teacher. So again, Kangyur Rinpoche is saying, disciples should have faith, the source of all spiritual qualities, and a clear, lucid intelligence, unafflicted by doubt. So that's where these two, the questioning, sometimes, actually Trungpa Rinpoche's regent, Uslu Tenzin, I remember he once gave a talk that was called Doubt as the Gateway to Faith. And I can't remember the exact sort of content of the talk, but basically I just thought the title was completely brilliant. Doubt as the gateway to faith. Doubt meaning our critical analysis that then really, in that our questions of being fully answered, then we really trust what's there. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, they should have acquired the knowledge that enables them to distinguish virtue from non-virtue. They should have great compassion of the Mahayana and deep respect for vows and samayas. They should be serene and disciplined in thought, word, and deed. So these are the qualities really of the path. There should be a discerning what's constructive, what's destructive. There should really be this nature of magnanimity, and there should be this appreciation for the discipline of the path, the vows and samayas. Moreover, they should be serene and disciplined in thought, word, and deed, meaning our entire being should be engaged. They should be broad-minded, magnanimous, not narrow-minded. Especially nowadays when we're engaging in the Dharma, so important to not be narrow-minded, and sort of like, this is how it should be done, you know, particularly in a culture which is not Buddhist. To have that sort of rigidity is completely off-putting and inappropriate and very uncompassionate. So that's where particularly the modern practitioner needs to be very broad-minded, easygoing, magnanimous. And also there, in the extension of that, it says here, and on friendly terms with their neighborhood, as well as their Dharma kindred. So that's where we should be able to get along with people in the neighborhood on a very ordinary level, and not have that sort of distinction like these are not Buddhists or these are not Dharma people or whatever it might be. Really on the sort of with that Mahayana broad-mindedness, recognizing any sentient being anywhere at all times have been a kind parent and wishing to establish connections with them. And then of course also getting along with the Dharma kindred. They're our Dharma brothers and sisters, those that are traveling the path. So then such students should act with generosity towards the pure fields and have pure perception with a sense of propriety toward others. So pure fields means the objects of refuge, basically. Let's see what it says here. This refers to the field of exalted qualities and fields of benefit and compassion. Ah, yeah, okay. So it means we have two fields, which are those that are the objects of, you could say, respect, that are fields of refuge. And that is where we would say those that constitute the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Vidyadharas, and so forth. The fields of benefit and compassion are those that we serve, which means sentient beings, those that we seek to benefit, those that are the objects of compassion. So one is what we could say the field of exalted qualities upwards, and then the fields of benefit and compassion downwards. We use those terms, but at the same time, of course, what's implicit here is that when we talk about compassion, it doesn't come from a hierarchical position also. So the choice of words here might be confusing, but when we talk about compassion, of course, we're not talking about pity for those that are inferior, but it's more those with whom we serve. So one of those from whom we apprentice, and the others are those that on the basis of having apprentice that we then serve without any sense of hierarchy or duality, or ultimately free from duality, but certainly even on the conventional level, simply seeing those as objects of our service, our commitment. Okay. They should be skilled in knowing how to please their teachers, like a supreme horse, not jibbing at reproof. They should abandon weariness like boats that come and go. Like bridges, they should bear all things, both good and ill. Like anvils, they should stand both heat and cold. Like servants, they should heed instructions. They should rid themselves of pride, like those who sweep the streets, and give up arrogance, like bulls with broken horns. The teacher should be followed thus, for so the texts declare. So that's again where we're drawing on, already have established the validity of the texts, the scriptures. So again, this is not in the context of something that we blindly embrace as dogma, and hence we just say yes, sir, or rather, prior to saying yes, sir, there has to be this assessment of the, you could say, the validity, the epistemic validity of these texts. Anyway, okay, I'm a little bit, I have to confess here, just because I'm a foreigner, and I should have, of course, researched this. What is it? What does jibbing at reproof mean? Does anyone know? I'm not, like the supreme horse, not jibbing. So they should be skilled in knowing how to please their teachers. Now, this doesn't mean to bribe the teachers or think, oh, the teacher will like me if I give the teacher this. Of course, we should know what the teacher might find useful or might like in some conventional sense. Very often teachers will pretend to have particular preferences, simply just to enable the students to have some means with which they can connect with the teacher. But yeah, like if we read the lives of the masters of the Longchen Nyingtik, we can read about Yuthok Chatrawa, who famously liked his porcelain cups, or at least, that's where seems to be maybe something he pretended, but that's where then in that case, then maybe a porcelain cup would be a really great thing to offer the teacher. But then it says here, like the supreme horse, not jibbing at reproof. That's where I'm afraid I might. Jibbing to stop and refuse to go on. Okay, not liking the reproof. Okay, so it's basically being stubborn, right? Sometimes people, the sanghas, can get exhausted doing what. Hold on, that's a different one. Yeah, we'll get to that. Not liking the. So it's like reprimanding, right? And jibbing means simply refusing to go on. So the horse is the horse is being sort of scolded and then getting stubborn all about it. Yeah, that's not very skillful. My dad was a horse rider. I probably mentioned this every time I could get an opportunity, but he was kind of exceptional. He never actually used the crop. He always would make friends with his horses. He used to actually bribe them, bringing them sugar, which I'm sure wasn't good for their teeth. But his approach was very much this gentle approach. And as a result, he was very successful as a horse rider. Anyway, so knowing how to please it, like supreme horse, not jibbing at reproof. They should abandon weariness like boats that come and go. Like bridges, they should bear all things, both good and ill. So that's where the students should be particularly good at accepting whatever the teacher will generally just be tough on close students. So this is so it would really, I remember around Dinghu Chenzo Rinpoche, it would really just be with the really close students that Rinpoche would be a little bit strict. He didn't have to be very strict because he was naturally, you could say, exuded such, you could say, authority that, just there would never be a question of doing exactly what Rinpoche would say. But sometimes then for close students, then he would sort of demonstrate a little bit of you could say disapproval. So that's where the student has to be completely there for that kind of situation. Like animals, they should stand heat and cold. So that's also when, for example, attending teachings and so on, there should be complete willingness to be there regarding whether it's hot and cold, and in general, whatever the teacher. This, of course, it has to be, again, in the context of complete trust in the teacher. And of course, as we all know from recent events, then this is very problematic in the modern context because the situation is just not there. You say cultural atmosphere is very different. Students are conditioned in a very different way. And also, the teacher really needs to know exactly the atmosphere and the situation. And so be really skillful in exactly knowing what the student can take and not take. So that's where it requires also requires a lot of skill on the part of the teacher. But yes, in that case, then what we call the sort of wrathful activity or the sort of the wrathful way of being then with very close students, then the student would need to be like this, standing heat and cold. Like servants, they should heed instructions. They should be completely appreciative, not just as like, okay, the slog, but really like something extraordinary has happened. There has been instructions given, and so there should be this sort of immediate joy in actually applying oneself to that. Again, this completely goes beyond some of the practices in modern education, but it is implicit really on the path of enlightenment that the teacher, being entirely selfless, having no concern for anything except the student's enlightenment, exclusively is acting in ways that are entirely appropriate. Once that is established, then what we're saying here becomes completely okay. But again, also, this particularly, of course, was written and taught within a culture, a Buddhist culture, in which the situation is very different. But then again, we can aspire. what we can do here reading this and saying, well, this is difficult nowadays, but we can aspire to certainly, when we receive teachings that might not sort of rub us the right way, that we really appreciate it. So that's where we can train ourselves and put down the seeds for effectively abiding by what's intended here. They should rid themselves of pride, like those who sweep the streets, and give up arrogance, like bulls with broken horns. Okay, so if you're a janitor, this is essentially what my profession is. I'm presently posing as a Buddhist instructor, but my actual true profession is janitor. And for many years, I've worked as a janitor. And yes, it does actually help pride. I can tell you from experience, you're sort of the lowest of the low in the hierarchy that starts way up with the doctors and the administrators down through all sorts of ranks of caregivers. And it's in a very noble institution and when it's the hospitals. But otherwise, also within societies, there is this. And that's where those that then sweep the streets, they are very often not particularly viewed with a lot of respect. And of course, we can say that's not nice, but that's sort of the reality. And even within sort of, you could say, modern context, then there's all sorts of things where we actually sort of might have that sort of view that effectively leads to the others having to give up their pride. Essentially, pride is just not helpful. That's the point, really. And so that's where we in one way or another, we can understand how pride effectively lack of pride. We can understand how lack of pride effectively plays out. And then there's giving up arrogance, like bulls with broken horns. The bulls are mighty, they're big, strong, and yet with broken horns, not much they can do. So they're still mighty. And they still actually, the implication is that there's a lot of magnanimity, there's a lot of greatness, and yet there's no aggression. So there's no using might to achieve agendas, self-centered agendas. The teacher should be followed thus, for so the text declares. So again, Jigme Lingpa is essentially again being humble because he's saying this is not something I thought up, but this is something that comes down in the sutras, and particularly this is taught a lot in the tantras. So, gosh, this is embarrassing. I've sort of taken up all the space without referring to Kangyur Rinpoche. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, good disciples should be like well-behaved children, knowing how to please their teacher and how to avoid displeasing him or her. 1. 2, even if their teacher scolds them severely and often as need arises. And please emphasize when there's a need. So we have a student that recognizes the value of what's happening and a teacher that only scolds out of necessity. So in that context, then the student should behave like intelligent horses and restrain their anger. 3, in order to accomplish their teacher's purpose, disciples should be like boats sailing back and forth without weariness. So you have ferries, right? That they don't get tired of doing the same route every day. Like a bridge, they should be able to withstand any circumstance, good or bad, happiness or suffering, praise or blame. 5, disciples should be like an anvil, unmoved by the summer's heat and the winter's cold. Like servants, they should be obedient and meticulous in carrying out their teacher's instructions. 7, they should be respectful toward their teachers and the spiritual community with the humility of a street sweeper. They should reflect upon their own shortcomings and avoid all arrogance, like the old bull whose horns are broken and who takes the last place in the herd. In the Bodhisattva Pitaka, it is said that if disciples act in this way, they will be relying on their teacher correctly. So that's why we would always say, we need to go back to these teachings and simply just compare ourselves and just make sure that we essentially conform to what is being taught here. So let's see, we might go a little bit over time here. This is great. It's very provocative material. So Could you please repeat the 7 qualities of sublime beings? Okay, so these are Dedan Tsulchim. So it's faith, discipline, it's generosity, it's study, then it's shame, and that's from the inside, in terms of we know whether or not we're doing is right. And then there's decorum, which is also how others see us. And then finally there's wisdom. So these are the 7 qualities of sublime beings, the 7 riches of the bodhisattvas sometimes. I recently heard someone non-Buddhist said that faith is uncompromised belief. Absolutely. That's why I was saying what I was saying. Yeah, absolutely. And if this is the case, then nothing religious, there's nothing religious or to be skeptical about faith. We could say we have faith in science, maths, history, or cooking, and egg, as Rinpoche says. Don't you think? Yes, and that is where we then, that's right. And so we'd want to have faith on the basis of our uncompromised belief. That's right. So once we have, yes, you're right. So once we understand that an egg is cooked, then it's not as if we doubt what's going to happen if we boil an egg. It's not as if we have doubt with regards to the nature of mathematics and so forth. History, that's a little bit tricky, but yeah. Don't know about history. That's because that's essentially just passed down narratives. But yes, science aims, science certainly aims at having that. Yeah, uncompromised. You could say, well, it's essentially all about what we refer to as epistemology, or in Buddhism, pramana, valid cognition, and that leads to certainty. And it's on the basis of certainty that we then can relax. We know how long time it takes for an egg to cook. The egg will cook, the water will boil. You could say effect follows cause, and so forth. So that's where there's a complete certainty in what we're doing. And that's an important point where, again, it's problematic with blind faith, because that's where we actually would like to possibly, you could say, tag along, but at the same time, there's not certainty. What really provides certainty is then this questioning. And that's where, on the basis of questioning, skepticism, then we begin to assess and assert the validity of something as being, you could say, the truth of the fact. Yeah. Sometimes people or sanghas can get exhausted doing what the teacher asks. Should the teacher be aware of the limits? Should the teacher be aware of the limits of the students, or should they speak up? Well, that's where we're talking about an enlightened teacher. So the teacher will do exactly what is appropriate. And then at that time, then the students necessarily need to do exactly what the teacher says. So that's where they need to completely ignore their fatigue. So that's where, of course, we need to have a very different situation that we often hear about in the modern context, where we think of gurus as exploiters, as students as naive persons that are being exploited, and so forth. So that's where, without a proper understanding of what we really mean with enlightenment and an enlightened teacher, then the whole thing can really become very corrupt. And certainly in the modern context, it's even questionable. And many teachers, they make that point, it's even questionable whether this actually works. Let's hope it does, because it is essential for us to touch on something that is deeply, intimately genuine. And this can never be done on the basis of the teacher and the students abiding just by, you say, rigid parameters of prescribed legislations, laws, conventions, and so forth. We won't get very far in terms of really engaging with the teacher. It's a bit like with human relationships. If there's deep trust, so much can transpire. If there's no trust, well, yes, then we need to have a legislation in place. So we're talking about a zone which is difficult to navigate in the modern context, but which I hope that as we're studying this, then there is an appreciation of really what the potential, what really is implied here, what it is that's potential in when we talk about the path of enlightenment. So stubborn. Oh, this was about the horse. Yeah. So someone says this is very timely. Good. When I was a young child, the first thing I thought of doing later as a job was sweeping the street. Okay, yeah. You know, this is a really great job. I tell you why. You have no worries. First of all, you have to get up early when the air is still fresh. And then you're off work. You do 8 hours or whatever, and you're off pretty early in the afternoon, and you don't have to worry about a thing. So and it's everybody actually when I was a janitor, people would so often have washed the floor and then somebody would walk across it, and they had to because they were working, and they would always apologize. People actually, they look to the to the janitors, and very often they kind of want to compensate, and they're sort of very polite then. So certainly my experience was always very positive. Yeah. So hey, if you're young looking for a career that doesn't involve a lot of excess worry, excess responsibilities, and so forth, consider janitoring, becoming a sweeper. Okay, all right. So on that note, providing career advice here, we'll conclude the session for today. So let's see. Next will be how to serve and follow the teacher. Okay. Good on. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you. Thank you. See you next week.